Swim, Charlie, swim. Welcome to Is It a Classic, where we discuss famous films and some not so famous films. And about each one, we ask the all important question, is it a classic? Today, we turn our attention to Steven Spielberg's 1975 summer blockbuster, or if you were in the UK, winter blockbuster, Jaws. There will be spoilers. Let's get started. Okay, give us Jaws in a nutshell.
It's a funny one, this one, because it's almost like if there's any film that needs no introduction, it's
Yeah.
Steven Spielberg's Jaws. Um, this is a film which was a total phenomenon. It's probably one of the handful of films where if somebody who had no interest in cinema at all whatsoever, as an entertainment form or art form, whatever, they probably seen this. They know the poster, they know the premise. You know, along with a handful of films like Star Wars, Wizard of Oz. It's just something that exists in the culture in such a way that, you know, not just unavoidable, but has had a real long-lasting impact. So we can talk in this subsequent conversation about why that is, why that has become such a phenomenon. But this is a phenomenon. This is like the great white shark of cinema. Yeah.
Oh, I see what you did there. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's brilliant. Yeah, and I said there will be spoilers, as if that makes any difference at all. Can there be anybody who is remotely interested in seeing and hearing this conversation who doesn't already know what happens? Okay. So anyway, thanks for that. Um, let's move on to what we like about this film, and I'm just going to pull rank slightly, if I may. I'm going to go first just with a teeny bit of self-indulgence because I saw this film when it was first released. So I can play that trump card. I think I'm a fair bit older than you. I saw this when it was first released. You couldn't possibly have seen it when it was first released, I'm sure. And I just want the first thing that I want to say that I like about this film is a more general, nostalgic glance back at 1975. Just bear with me a moment, because I was a young lad in 1975. In May of that year, Evel Knievel came over to the UK and smeared himself along the landing ramp of a spectacular misfire attempt to jump over some London buses at Wembley Stadium, and all the children went absolutely nuts for that. I absolutely loved that. I became a big Evel Knievel fan for quite a long time. After that. That was fantastic. That was May of 75. In the winter of 75, Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody becomes the number one single in the UK and stays there. And I travelled across from the southwest of England up to the northeast of England for Christmas in Scarborough to spend Christmas in Scarborough with my aunt and uncle in 1975, and we heard Bohemian Rhapsody multiple times on the radio on that journey, which was a trip of several hours, because that's the way radio worked back then. They just had, the hits were just on rotation as you went through the day. And then we had Christmas, and shortly after Christmas, we were amongst the first people in England to see Jaws because we saw it as a Christmas treat, and it scared the absolute living daylights out of me. I can tell you, I was probably too young to see it, but not in the sense of being smuggled into the cinema, but just I think the certificate was pretty generous at the time. I think it was given an A certificate, which is no longer used, but basically, as long as you had an adult with you, you were allowed in to see the film. Anyway, sorry, that was my piece of 1975 nostalgia. Now let's properly talk about the film. What do we like about this?
This is a they say about this film is the first proper summer blockbuster, and it's
Yeah,
set in July, ostensibly July of the present time, 1975.
yeah,
And so there's much that's been said about the Jaws summer when it came out in America. Why do you think that this film? I asked you directly, like, why, having been there at the time, why do you think this film became the phenomenon, the worldwide phenomenon that it did? You've sort of seen films before it, you've seen films after it. Like, what
yeah.
was it about this film that year that
Yeah.
really captured everybody?
Well, maybe we'll get into this, and I'm looking forward to your views. I think it was. I think it landed in a glorious sweet spot between family entertainment and scary as hell, and and that's quite a difficult sweet spot to hit, isn't it? Because almost they're almost mutually exclusive. You know, if it's family entertainment, it's not going to be terrifying. How can it be? Because it's family entertainment. But I think that's one of the reasons it became a phenomenon, because I think it just hit that, it just hit the jackpot. Um, for the vast majority of the running time, it's kind of a family film. Of course you could take your kids to it. It's a bit of an adventure film. It's set at the seaside. What's not to like? There are lots of children and families in this film. It's about going on holiday to some extent. It's about going out in the sunshine in a boat. It all kind of sounds. It's all kind of bright and sunny, but it was very, very scary. And I think it was probably also the first film to just somehow hit on that. I think it touched a nerve which mankind had not realized was waiting to be pinged around fear of sharks. That had been, to some extent, that had been a trope in films up to that point. The kind of the dorsal fin slicing through the water in quite a lot of films. But I think, again, this one just hit the sweet spot. So I think it was that kind of the combination of fear and family entertainment, which is an extremely lucrative market if you can tap into it. And there was something very sharky about the sharkiness of it, which was also tapping into something which was almost like a market that was waiting to be opened up. And it was, because again, I think possibly lost to history unless you watch the documentaries. But I remember, because I was there was an absolute ton of shark books, magazines, soft toys, merchandise in the wake of this film. I think a lot of that's disappeared now. People wouldn't be interested. But if you were there at the time, it was a massive phenomenon in the way that Star Wars later perhaps is better remembered as having generated a lot of magazines and books and merch. But in fact, Jaws did that as well. Certainly in the UK, I'm sure it did in the States.
I think the point is well made there about how this does basically work as a family entertainment, and it has the thrills that push it a little bit further out so that it feels um, nervy and interesting. I think this film, if we think about it in terms of who directed it, Steven Spielberg. I sort of think of it as having exemplifying maybe four of the qualities that would recur in his films. One of which is the family being quite central to the plot of the film.
Yeah,
So, first time we see Brody, he's with his family. The thing that flips him is his son
yeah,
playing in that pond and being shocked by the seeing the shark attack in front of him. So there's a strong family element, as there is in Close Encounters, as there is in Jurassic Park, as there is in countless other Spielberg films. Um, there's an element of wonderment, or the wondrous. So Spielberg turns things in the world into these realms of possibility. And with this, he does it with the ocean. With Close Encounters, he does it with the sky. With sort of Jurassic Park, he does it with genetics. With Raiders of the Lost Ark, he does it with history, and the other continents. He makes the marvelous out of what might be the ordinary or the dusty or the commonplace or whatever. But the way that he turns the ocean in this film into this mysterious mass of possibility is quite extraordinary, and it's a real feat in sort of how you dynamically render, say, something we've seen in countless films.
yeah.
The other thing is exactly what
But
you said.
sorry to interrupt you. I'll just say something to you again. First-hand experience validating what you've just said. Again, it became a cliche, but if you saw this film back in the day, it really did make people scared to go in the water.
Mm,
That's become a trope. It actually did happen. I mean, I think I would even go so far as to say this is donkey's years later. I think I can't go in the sea now. Having seen that film, it made such a massive impact. Um, if I go into the sea now, anything above about kind of knee height in water, I cannot stop myself from having at least one moment where I just think about Jaws. And
yeah.
you're right. There's something about the depiction of the water. multiple depictions of, the depth, the kind of the concealment that water offers, the possibility of ambush that water offers, the fact that even in relatively shallow water, you don't really know what might only be a few feet away from you. That's done fantastically well in this film.
Yes,
You
and
take it for
that
granted, actually, because it
yeah,
sounds obvious. It doesn't sound like much when you say it out loud, but like you've just said, a relatively mundane thing to see.
and it kind of it's rendered in terms of, as I say, another thing that would define blockbuster cinema, which is a characteristic of Spielberg, which is something you were referring to earlier, which is there's a lightness and there's a darkness in here, but the tone is very kind of evenly balanced. So the way that it plays out is like the character relationships, there's a lightness. There's a kind of degree to which like Quint is played up as a little bit cartoony. The Richard Dreyfuss character is sort of a bit more of this bumbly that, Brody is more of a solid sort of Gary Cooper type. Um, but these interactions are not serious, shouty drama. It's not like Dog Day Afternoon or something. There is, a real sort of people would sometimes say Hitchcockian because of the suspense, but it's also Hitchcockian, and that Hitchcock kind of knew to keep the films at the level of a sort of black comedy. That the audience would be more along for the ride for the dangerous stuff if the other stuff was lighter, and that's something that's really true of this film, where when the violence happens, it really happens. You see ripped off legs or this and that, and
Yeah,
that become characteristic of blockbusters because that's something he carried on doing, like Indiana Jones. When something crazy happens in Indiana Jones, it's really crazy. There's eyeballs and there's this and that, but it's just scary enough to be a lovely scare for kids. But then we get back to the lightness, and then it's just very well calibrated.
yes, that's right. Scary as hell, and then wind it back in again. Yeah, okay, that's cool. Yeah, okay. Um, all right. Can I say something about? All right, I'm going to just put two things together here. I'm going to return to one of my big preoccupations and just briefly give a nod and a shout out to the fact that there are tons and tons of ordinary faces and bodies in this film. And I love that in films. I love that in films of the period. We've talked about that before in other discussions. I just really, really like the fact that the people who are in this film look like absolute real people. They do not look like they've come out of central casting. They don't look like they've been drummed through, theatre schools or, whatever, or had all the rough edges sanded off. They're the complete opposite. They're complete opposite. I've made that point before. I don't want to kind of go on about that, but it's a joy to watch a film like that, which looks as if somebody's just pointed a camera at the place where you live or somewhere where you might actually go on holiday. That's fantastic. I wanted to talk about the acting. I wanted to see what you think, because I might be I don't know if I've quite nailed this down. So tell me what you think. I've also talked before about the fact that it's very enjoyable and there's different types of acting going on in the same film, and often that's a generational thing. The young guns pushing in one direction, the old hands are kind of holding on to something from a different tradition. That was very evident, in something like 12 Angry Men. I actually think there's four different styles of acting. Tell me what you think about this. I'll try and be quick. It going on in this film. I think Roy Scheider is that sort of twitchy, edgy, gritty. It almost feels a bit new wavy in American cinema style of acting. We've talked a little bit about that before. So Scheider's holding up one element. That's one school of acting. Robert Shaw is obviously bringing the old school thesp and theatrical tradition, which then moves into films. That's the second type. I think Murray Hamilton, who's Larry Vaughan, the mayor, to me, he just speaks entirely of kind of American television character actor, the kind of stuff that endless television and films have been built on the back of. People like that who can just hold the part down, speak lines brilliantly, be very engaging. But that's a different style of acting. And then I think I have a little bit of an issue with Richard Dreyfuss. I feel, I think he's bringing a fourth style of acting, which is a little bit light comedy almost. He's behaving a bit like he's in a kind of like in a Woody Allen film or something. But that's a different style. So what do you reckon? Four? Am I over egging it? Are there more than four? Are there not even as many as four? What do you reckon? I
I
enjoyed
mean,
the fact that there's so much variety because I think it basically means there's something for everyone.
I think there are at least four different styles of acting going on. And I think that's deliberate on Spielberg's part. And I think it works really well. It is a kind of alchemical thing. Um, yes, there is a degree to which Roy Scheider as Brody is a kind of stoic hero in the sort of old school. But as you say, he's also slightly new wavy. He's also slightly kind of twitchy and 70s and a bit more sort of yeah, there's a bit more going on there. There is a post Brando thing happening. Um, really the Dreyfus part is the interesting thing because as you say, that's the thing that kind of maybe exists outside of the expected range of this film. But I think a lot of what is going on there is there's a lot in this film that is about macho um, sort of one-upmanship and competitiveness. There is, this the classic, when they're trying to do something, they're trying to achieve something, they're trying to kill the shark. There's a lot of people who think that they know how to do it. There's a lot of these men on the shoreline
Yeah.
who think that they know what they're doing, and then there's somebody who may, in fact, know more better how to do it than another person, and then they whittle it down to there was it Richard Dreyfuss as the oceanographer, and then we've got Quint, who's the old seaman, who's the old, he's been, and then famously tells that story about, just how much experience he's had with dangerous
Mm.
sharks. Um, but the Dreyfus part, I read somewhere that it was almost like a Spielberg stand-in, and you can see that with someone like Spielberg, where Spielberg, as the filmmaker, as the technician, almost amongst these kind of big burly crew members, or they like you probably would feel like you're the person with the smarts, but not so much with the brawn. There's an interesting thing when Richard Dreyfuss is introduced. You might remember this. He gets up onto the dock, and they immediately position him against the man who's much taller than him,
Yeah.
and that is clearly so
Hello,
deliberate.
young fella, he says. It's that scene,
Yeah,
isn't it? He gets up out of the boat. Hello, young fella. And he says, hello yourself.
yeah,
Yeah,
there's
and he's
very,
about
there's very,
3 feet taller than him. Yeah,
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 and you just imagine an actor who would want that to be their introduction.
yeah.
I'll
Good
put,
point.
put you against somebody who's. We're going to establish how short you are
Good
as you
point.
go into the
Yeah, I
film.
never thought about that
Like,
before, but yeah, if you think this is only, 2, 3 decades after, that sort of presentation of one of the lead characters in a film being absolute heresy. Hollywood's got a history of putting leading male actors, with platform shoes and standing them on boxes and making the female characters stand in holes or whatever, so that they could always be presented as kind of tall and towering and so on. Good point.
yeah, we talked about Bogart in the previous episode, and
Yeah,
yeah, he was a guy who wore lifts, because he would
yeah,
be as shorter than some of the women. So it's
yeah,
that kind of thing. And they always wanted to hide it, but like Dreyfus comes in, and it's deliberate because it's this thing of like that this dynamic that's being played out in the film of um, there's all these men who all want to be the guy who says, I know what I'm doing. And the film is all there's a kind of a thing where it's like the intellectuals know what they know, the bespectacled intellectuals like Dreyfus,
yeah,
who are outbrawned but still have the know-how, and then the brawny, represented by Robert Shaw, Quint,
yeah,
they know what they know, and they need to come together, and that's the only way that we're going to do this. And
yeah,
Dreyfus he plays it's not a thankless role, but it is a role that's very much you're playing a person who's constantly dismissible in this environment, and you're trying to fight to sort of overcome your neuroses, or because they establish very clearly like he's the son of a rich family, he's sort of university educated, he's completely pun intended, like out of his depth here, like amongst all of these brawny fishermen, and
Yeah.
he has no authority. And it was, what is it? Quint says, "Well, we're bringing him along as ballast." You know, that's how much respect he has for him.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
But
so
then
it's interesting, isn't it? It's interesting that again, I don't want to get too far into the weeds here because I mean, endless analysis and discussion of this film. It's interesting that what happens is Brody, who has neither of those things, he can't call on the kind of the old school Quint experience, and he can't call on the kind of university and fieldwork smarts of Hooper, and he's the one who's given the ability to sort of integrate some of what Quint knew and was able to do, some of what Hooper bequeaths him with the compressed cylinder and so on. And he's the one who's given the opportunity to bring the film to a conclusion. But in fact, he's the one with the least promise. He's the least well qualified person to be on that boat and dispatch that shark. But obviously, the film is carrying a torch for him, and in a sense punishes the two more expert characters and awards the kind of the gold medal position, as it were, to the person who's set up right from the beginning as the most unlikely person to thwart a shark whilst dangling off the top end of a boat. Interesting
Yeah,
arc, isn't it?
yeah, and I think that in a very 70s way, um, these characters are all flawed.
Yeah.
They all have their shortcomings. It's like there's the bit where the mayor says, "Oh," to Hooper, like, "Oh, you just want to be in National Geographic," and he's
Yes.
like, "What?" And then but then there's the bit later on where he tries to get Brody to get on the stern of the ship because he's trying to take a picture, and he's like, "I need a
Yes.
picture for
Yeah.
this."
Yeah.
And you're like, okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Of
he is a little bit of there is a little bit of mixed motivations going on there,
course.
and
Yeah.
Quint
Yeah. Yeah.
he's he's crazy. Like
Yes.
he may know what
Yes.
he's doing, but the film firmly establishes, especially when he smashes up
Yeah.
the what is it the radio, that he is mad.
Yes.
So
Yes. He's an obsessive, isn't he? He is a bit of an Ahab, Captain Ahab kind of character. Yeah. Okay, that's cool. Yeah. All right. Listen, I want to let me move us on. Something that I meant to say first before talking about the acting, but we can just mention it now. Um, again, I watched this film again yesterday. I've no idea how many times I've seen Jaws. I've lost count, and I've seen it in the cinema more than once as well. Um, I was really struck when I watched it again yesterday how perfect that introductory section is. It's an absolute gem. And I found myself thinking yesterday, in other words, start with the beach party, the young woman Chrissy goes into the water, that scene that concludes with the shark attack and then she disappears. Um, I just thought that's an absolute. I can't imagine. It would be great fun, wouldn't it, to give that to sort of half a dozen top directors now and say, look, 3 minutes, you've got however long that sequence is, it's really quite short. Your chance to just make that section of the film and see what different people would do with it. But I'm not sure you could improve on that. I'm sure different directors obviously would bring their own kind of spiciness to it. But actually, that it still just struck me as what a perfect piece of cinema that is. What do you reckon? So one of my favourite bits is the first few minutes of the film, Head and Shoulders.
yeah, the amazing thing about that sequence is that it's almost musical. It's like a statement of the theme of the film. It's
Yeah,
the film in like in 3 minutes or something, or 3 to 5 minutes. It establishes absolutely everything that will then hang over the rest of the film, and it does it within a beautiful, suspenseful sequence that, yeah, just kind of gives you a tonal impression of what will come. It is brilliant, and a lot of the love for this film is based on that opening, how perfect that opening
yeah.
section is.
There's no part of the film that's better than that. There are
Not
lots of
really.
other memorable sections. There's lots of highs, a few lows as well. But actually, I don't think any part of the film, surpasses that. Now, is that great filmmaking? I guess it is, isn't it? But it feels, I'm sure it is, because you're totally hooked. But at the same time, it's a little bit like your favorite band coming out and playing their big hit single. at the start of the set role, and there's the first encore number. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but it's just so powerful to have something that's that impactful. Wham! Like being hit by a vehicle within the first few minutes of sitting in your seat, and it takes quite a while to recover from it. I think, and particularly as I recall, which I just about do, when you've seen it for the first time and you don't even know what's happening. It's an amazing start to a film.
It it establishes something that's so um, incredible about Spielberg as a master technician, which is that there's a there's a version of this film, obviously, that is a junky version. There's like a Roger Corman version of this material that could easily be made. Spielberg is like one of the great users of the widescreen frame in this film, and that's established right from the beginning with all of the with her running along the beach top and everything like that, and the sunset, and even the way that that shoots on the horizon line in the water and then under the water and all of that. And you said earlier about faces, so lots of different faces in this film. The film is crowded with activity in the background in the first half. You have this real sense of verisimilitude and activity. When they bit when they're in the town and there's the parade going by, and it's just like when they're on the docks and there's all these people. Like he Spielberg is such an awareness of what feels real, what draws you in, what makes it feel like something's happening, something. And there's all sort because I read somewhere, I didn't see it at the time, but they did like a 3D conversion of this about 10 years ago. And I can
Right.
understand that because there's so much going on. There's so much depth of field in the image. There's so much happening in these images, so deliberately so that I can see how you could add different planes of focus in it. And that's totally there from the beginning. Like this just visual mastery and this dynamism. Uh, yeah, there's it's it's kind of perfectly framed and rendered without having these overly arty flourishes. The only things you kind of notice is the sunset at the beginning, and then there's the shot between like the shark jaws when they're going out in the second half of the film.
Yes.
You
That
just
feels a
a
bit film school.
bit of
Yeah.
film school, yeah.
A bit film school.
But it's
Yeah.
nice in the sense that um, it kind of draws attention to itself because the film changes at
Mm.
the halfway point. It becomes just the three of them, and so it's like a cleave thing. Because there is a degree to which this film is basically a western. This is like the sheriff hires the old gunslinger and the
Yeah.
young buck, and they have to go and hole up on their own in some fortification
Yeah.
because they're bandits who are going to attack the
Yeah.
townspeople, and they're the only three. And so the second half is them, just them, you know.
Mm.
And I think that is also one of the great versions of this film. You said like opening sequence, absolutely, but the bisection of it, the fact that the first half is crowded, all the
Yeah.
frames are crowded, and the second half, the screen is filled with that blue ocean and that menace.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah. Um, okay. We're still talking about things that we like. I've donated quite a few. Is there anything that you haven't had a chance to say yet? I've got one other thing that I wanted to mention, but just checking you're riffing off what I've said. Have you had a chance to say what you wanted to say about what you like?
Go ahead and say your thing.
Okay. Well, again, hopefully you'll be able to say something about this as well. And it's another preoccupation of mine. I just wanted to say, sing the praises of. There's I think at least a couple of really just great examples of, wonderful blocking in this film. And I think the best one is a scene that lots of people will be very familiar with. Is the one in front of the Welcome to Amity billboard, where you've got the mayor and Hooper and Brody. It's the scene where they're trying to convince him that there really is a massive man-eating great white shark out there, and that we really should close the beaches. in a way, it's a distraction when you start looking out for these things and enjoying them on their own terms, because you're meant to just be drawn into the film, drawn into the character, the plot, and so on. But having seen it so many times, I love that scene because I can afford to just sit back a little bit and appreciate the aesthetics of the amazing blocking, the movement of the camera, the movement of the actors in and out of the frame. I don't know how many takes that took, but it's just a beautiful piece of filmmaking, and in its way is as wonderful a piece of cinematic kind of craft as that opening, as the intro, the opening shot, which is so amazingly impactful. That scene in front of the Welcome to Amity with the shark fin that somebody's painted on there. And those sort of three actors just weaving in and out of the frame and of each other's space and moving very close to each other, far away, a lot further away, out of frame. I think there's even one point where somebody exits the frame in one direction and appears like on the other side of the frame, so just wonderfully fluid. I love all that. You don't see enough of that in films, I think. I guess because it's actually quite hard work.
He directs this with incredible uh, efforts and attention. No, you're right. The the framing is exquisite. It would be very difficult to imagine how this looked on VHS with the pan and scan, as I say, because of the scenes like you were just talking about, where there's people spread all the way across the frame talking to each other, and you think,
Yeah,
who are you supposed to focus on? Because
yeah,
Spielberg's completely woven this incredible tapestry, this horizontal tapestry here, and even things like famous scenes of attacks and things like that. It's the blueness of the ocean that surrounds the thing that is part of what frames it and makes it so evocative. I think that just in terms of the scene you were talking about, like the thing where they're arguing in front of the billboard and they're trying to convince this mayor. I think that one of the things that is an incredible virtue of this film in particular, if you think about it in the lineage of blockbuster cinema that's emerged from it, is that I think we invest very much in Brody's quest to do the right thing and convince. I haven't read the book, but there's this, as far as I understand, some excise subplots that complicate the family
yeah,
situation. The decision that the film makes in make rendering a very convincing domestic family environment for Brody, and the two actors, the one him and the woman who plays his wife, do wonderful, you know, work conveying in just a few scenes a long marriage, parents, and all of that. That makes, I think, a blockbuster, a spectacular film, often sinks or swims based on, do we believe that the people that we're watching are real? And I think that Spielberg really achieves this in this film in particular. And it's something that he's probably better at than most. Often blockbusters, they swamp the people, that you get the
yeah,
spectacle. This film is like, 'cause it's like you were saying, even about when we talk about the people looking real, feeling real, the real faces, like the fact that this feels so grounded because of the human focus that it never loses, despite
yeah,
the creature feature quote unquote aspects of it.
yeah,
That's what really makes it endure, is that you can look back on it, I think 50 years on, or however long the time it's on, and you see a family and you see a man trying to do the right thing, and you can invest.
yeah. That's cool. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Can we move on to things that we don't like about this film, or is there anything else to say about what we do like?
I think we can move along here.
Move along. Okay. So let's now talk about what we don't like about this film. Um, Again, can I just go first because I want to raise a relatively minor point, and just so I can kind of get it off my chest. It's something that's always puzzled me. I don't know if you're even aware of this, if you've ever clocked it before, if you'll
This
even
is
know
what
what I'm
happens.
talking about. Say that again.
This is what happens. Is this the thing I thought?
Yes. Oh God. Here we go. Right. Yeah. That's it. 32 minutes in. What's going on there? Because this is an excellently edited film. And it's during the autopsy, isn't it? During Hooper's sort of autopsy, where he overrides the local, the coroner or whatever it is, the chief medical officer, and he says to Brody, please don't smoke in here. And then it just cuts, and he's lifting this sort of, prosthetic, this severed limb thing, and he says, "This is what happens." And then it just kind of cuts back. What is going on there? How has that survived all these years? How did that get through into the final print? It lit because if you were to cut that section out, it would make no difference at all. It's, or
Not
would
only
it? Perhaps we needed to see a severed limb at that point. I don't know. Why is that section in it?
I think that's the mentality. I think it was I think there was a certain amount of there needs to be these um like gore points where we need to see a
Okay.
little bit of blood. The edit, the reason it sticks out to us is that it actually breaks the rhythm of the scene. It actually stutters
Yeah, it
the thing,
stutters. Exactly right. Yeah.
and you can feel it where it's like he's talking, and then there's that insert, and then we go back to the scene, and it's the thing, it's basically what we were
Yeah.
just the
Yeah.
rhythm of the conversation we were just saying
Yeah.
that's just been broken by this
Yeah.
edit.
Okay.
Um,
So it
I
can
could
only really be justified because it's been cut because there was some need to show a little bit of a gory horror movie moment just for a few seconds there, basically. Is that what you
that
mean?
was
We just needed to see a severed limb
yeah.
instead of all this autopsy talk about what was in the box and what was on the table. Instead of just listening to the talk, we needed to see a little bit of it. But it's an amazingly clunky edit for such a prestige film that has been issued and reissued and reissued and reissued and polished and refurbed and upscaled. It's an amazingly clunky edit. I can't think of a time when I've watched a film of this rank where there's something so obviously just kind of almost like spliced in a really awkward way like that. Anyway,
No,
okay.
I think it's interesting because there's definitely aspects of this film where you can feel the gears moving in terms of wanting to make it um, a sellable property in terms of because it is sort of exploitation style material. It's like killer on the loose, right? And I remember reading that Spielberg initially was maybe reluctant to do it and he was going to do it. There was another film called Lucky Lady, which ended up being directed by Stanley Donen, which was one with, I think it was with Liza Minnelli and Gene Hackman, and that's like an old Hollywood thing. It's or an old Hollywood kind of pastiche. And I think he was because he'd done Duel and he didn't want to be the peril person, the person, the big threat filmmaker, that kind of suspense filmmaker, the action adventure guy. And one would imagine that there was producers who said, basically it'd be good if the film had some nudity, which gets in right out of the gate, and it'd be good if every 15 minutes or so
Yeah.
there was some blood, you know. And Spielberg, you can feel his instincts because one of the famous things about this film that people always talk about is, oh, the shark didn't look very good, so they use suggestion and everything like that. Yeah, I don't quite buy that. I think Spielberg was a clever enough filmmaker to know that, like the Hitchcockian model of if you don't show it, like if you don't show the knife going and the psycho thing, if you don't show it, it's more violent. And then everybody will leave the cinema insisting that they watched a woman get stabbed repeatedly when they saw
Yes.
absolutely nothing. And if they actually show the woman getting stabbed, it becomes less than what one could imagine. And so there's a lot of, like in that autopsy scene, clearly the way that they've been directed is, and Richard Dreyfuss does a brilliant job of like retching and getting
Yeah.
agitated and all of that, and that's clearly the modus operandi of Spielberg. He's like this what he's saying. no major organs remaining and everything like that. Like the gears are going in the audience's head.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I think he probably would have preferred that, and maybe I don't know. Maybe the producer said, "You got to show us a severed hand or
yeah,
something."
yeah. Okay, okay. Because there is a precedent for this. And again, I think this is a fairly well-known story. This idea of being more manipulative every 15 minutes, every 10 minutes, every half an hour or whatever. There is a precedent for it in the scene where Brody and Hooper go to they discover the fisherman's sunken boat, which is famously the scene in which Hooper recovers the shark's tooth and then drops it because this fisherman's head rolls out of the hole in the side of the hull. And I have heard Spielberg say that he filmed that was filmed after the rest of the film had been completed and after some test screenings, because he reckoned that moment they needed another major scare and it was just flagging slightly. So they literally just filmed that section after the rest of the film was completed. And I think it was complete. I think it was filmed in somebody's swimming pool somewhere in Beverly Hills, and yeah, done in a completely manipulative way, and very much almost like with a stopwatch. We need a scare at this point in the film. Too many minutes have gone by without something really scary happening, so we're just going to film another scare. We'll splice that in. So I suppose in a slightly more honourable way, that's the same sort of thing as this is what happens. It's just somebody has said we need something awful, we need something terrifying, we need something scary or uncomfortable to be on the screen at that point. Okay, fair enough.
And
It's
and there's
manipulative, it's clever, and it works.
Yeah, and I think the jump scare that happens there, and it's maybe something that we should have mentioned in the first half. The really amazing collaboration here is between Spielberg with the camera. I mean, it's several great collaborators because it's obviously this is a great premise, Peter Benchley premise, but it's like the two major heavy hitters on this are Spielberg and John Williams. And a
Yeah,
lot of the effectiveness of that jump scare is the sound
yeah,
and not just because the visual, if you were to watch it on mute, that head does not look in any way real. But
no,
the sound on the soundtrack is the thing that really jolts you. And there's even the woman scream in post on the soundtrack, to really just tell you what you're supposed to be feeling and thinking.
yeah,
You talk about manipulative.
yeah, yeah,
Um, yeah. But um, and famously the soaring cellos and all of that when the shark fin being seen through the water. Um, it's a real potent combination of sound and
mm.
image throughout this whole thing. And do you like the jump scare in the boat? Is that something that feels too manipulative? Or
Yeah, I do actually. Again, I can remember seeing it for the very first time. It was very scary. It's a classic jump scare, isn't it? I mean, it's very much of its type. You force people to look intently at one part of the image. You direct their eyes onto one particular part of the image, and then while they are absorbed, watching intently that one part of the image, you introduce another element which moves into their field of view, their pinpoint field of view, that moves into that field of view unexpected. It's a clever technique. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's good. I love the idea in a sense that he was watching this film and thinking it's such great fun when people are scared. Why can't we just scare them a little bit more? I mean, I think that's a perfectly laudable motivation for a writer, director, whatever, for anyone involved in films to just sort of think I think he was enjoying the impact that the film was having on people and just wanted to ramp up that impact a little bit more. And that's great because that's a relationship, isn't it?
Mm.
That's acknowledging a relationship. I do something, you do something, and then I react to you, you react to me, I react to you, between the director and the audience. What's not to like?
Oh, it's a thrill. It's a thrill. I like that jump scare as well. I think it sort of comes at exactly the right point. And everything that Um, and it does this very effective thing of it it increases the sense of the threat because you know we are constantly trying to gauge how competent our protagonists are. And Hooper's saying, "I'll just go down there and
Yeah,
check it out." And of course, when he sees the head, he drops his equipment.
yeah,
Uh, and this is
yeah,
something he does later on as well. And so there's always the sense of this thing is so scary that
yeah,
it may even like affect the competency of our people, and then
yeah.
we don't want that because we want them to get the shot. So it's always jolting you in those ways that make you go, are they going to be able to do this? Uh, and that just makes it more of a suspense ride.
Yes, there is a sort of a sense in the film, isn't there, that every time people think that they wonder whether something is true or are they getting a measure of the shark? Do they know about the shark? That it comes along and does something else, which is even more terrible or even more amazing or even harder to believe. The shark kind of increases in, there's a sense in which it becomes almost, it's got like a supernatural presence, really, as the film goes on. I mean, it starts off as a brute animal that attacks, what it obviously thinks is legitimate prey right at the start of the film. And by the end of the film, it's doing spooky and sort of slightly mysterious things, isn't it? It's like it's deliberately targeting and it's vengeful and it's intelligent.
Mm.
And I think that's the sense of that is ramped up as the film goes on. The shark moves from being something which is recognizably just an animal doing what comes naturally to gradually moving through various stages of thwarting people's expectations and ramping up the extent of the menace and the terror that it can cause to the point where, as I say, at the end of the film, it's like a human actor with what appears to be superpowers and almost like supernatural ability to overcome physical limitations and so on. And that's a very interesting arc as well, because that keeps you worried right up to the end of the film that you still haven't quite seen what the shark can do, because every time it appears, it turns out to be capable of doing something even more awful than the last thing that it did. And I think that's very clever. It's cool.
It is. It's good. I think one of the really effective things about the closing stretch of this film, the sort of the last hour, is that very slowly the film gains this sort of quite mad momentum, where you're not only drawn into the madness of maybe a character like Quint, you're in this sense of the solitudinous quality of being at sea for as long as they are, and the kind of weird, amorphous sort of psychological drift that occurs in those sort of close quarter settings, but also the mad that they are trying to adhere to the shark's logic. They're trying to follow it, kind of match its energy, as they say nowadays. And this kicks the film into a sort of bizarre nether space where it's almost, as I say, there's a weird symbiotic relationship there that feels quite mad. It's a film. I think one of the things that makes this film quite successful with people is that it like I said about it taking place in the real world, it is about a pragmatic thing, and it involves a lot of demonstratively pragmatic actions and operations. It's about what kind of equipment you need, what kind of uh, knot you need to tie in order to fasten something to this and everything like that. And it really grounds it in everything. That a person who, as I say, may be not interested in cinema, they can watch this film and recognize a real world operation being played out with somebody. And this is sort of Spielberg's that fastidious kind of, because people, often great directors are great technicians and they're interested in technical things. And, Spielberg's clearly interested in seamanship, and he
Yeah,
demonstrates that in the way that he draws out the second half of the film. But what the film then achieves in that second half is a sort of almost weird, mystical, like sense of the ocean as this like bizarre space that's
yeah,
full of menace and threat, and
yeah, yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah,
like something is induced, the fever is induced
yeah,
that has to then
yeah,
explode
yeah.
at the end.
and I would respectfully submit that you only have to watch any one of the kind of excremental sequels to this film to
Mm.
realize that it's so not as easy as simply going back out on a boat onto the water where there may or may not be a shark around, and all of this magic will unfold because it's somehow inherent in the scenario or somehow inherent in the sharkiness of sharks or whatever. Because none of the subsequent follow-up films, although in some senses they inherit all that possibility, none of them have got a patch of that in there at all. They've got none of that kind of feverishness, none of that sort of poetry, none of that kind of that mad kind of escalation of energy between the kind of the predator and the prey, and who is the predator and who is the prey here, and none of that at all. And yet they inherit the props and the scenery and some of the characters and whatever. But it's all gone as soon as you move away from the original film. None of the others are really any good at all, which just shows you how much kind of magic was injected in a fantastic screenplay and tremendous director. Well,
Yeah, yeah,
I would argue. Okay,
yeah.
listen, we're still on things that we're not keen on in the film. I've got one more main thing that I wanted to mention. Is before I do that, anything that you want to say?
I just quickly say, for me, I think it probably would be preferable were Hooper to die at the end. I understand that this happens in the book.
Yeah,
It should seemingly make more sense um, for Brody to be alone, just
yeah,
one on one with the shark. I understand why they did it, but it's so reaching for a death scene for Hooper when he gets he busted in the cage and everything, and then him sort of taking a powder out and then returning. That feels a little Hollywood. I wouldn't say it's film breaking. It just
yeah,
it works, but
yeah,
it doesn't quite. Maybe a Brody one-on-one would be
yeah,
quite
yeah.
dramatic. And
Okay, okay. I like that actually because, in a sense, I agree with you. I have read the book years and years and years ago. Um, and you alluded earlier to some of the subplots and stuff, which were all cut out of the film because they would have been far too distracting. But yeah, in the book, um, Hooper has an affair with Ellen Brody, and yes, he dies at the end. I guess he doesn't have the affair and he doesn't die. So maybe that's symmetrical, but I agree with you. It almost looks like a lost opportunity that he doesn't die after the attack on the cage and the fact that he has to escape and so on. And the fact that he survives kind of allows the film to do something which I guess I can, if I just sort of develop the point a little bit. One of my slight irritations is there are moments of, we talked earlier about hitting the sweet spot and perfect balancing of tension and relaxation and so on, and fear, and then winding it back in. But I think it's just my last thing to say, really, which I'll piggyback on the back of what you've just said. The fact that Hooper survives, I feel the ending is a bit trite, and it only really happens because Hooper survives. So the pair of them can have this little bit of buddy dialogue and fashion a sort of a raft, and then make some little joke as they paddle, back off towards the beach or whatever. Um, that feels a little bit like, after what should have been the complete horror of what they've just been through. It's amazing, isn't it, that, clearly trauma had not been invented. I'm not quite sure when trauma was invented. I've got my tongue in my cheek when I say that, but it clearly had never been heard of in 1975. If you think of what they've just been through, and they finished the film sort of cackling and bantering as they sort of paddle to shore like a couple of teenagers who are out just on a summer vacation trip. And I think that's enabled by the fact that Hooper has survived. I think if Brody had been on his own, that would have been quite a different trip to shore, wouldn't it, for somebody who's got a powerful fear of the water? And that's a missed opportunity. But I think there's something Spielbergian maybe about the need to lighten the mood there, or maybe that was just kind of more characteristic of films at the time. The last 60 seconds, 2 minutes, or whatever, needed to lighten the mood. That's quite an old-fashioned way of finishing, isn't it? Everybody's okay, don't have nightmares, you're all right there. I mean, um, because my final thing was just to say that although earlier we praised that kind of perfect balance, I actually think that sometimes the score, I just get slightly irritated with John Williams' score in the sort of the latter third of this film, because sometimes it's quite playful, and there's a lot. It just sounds like there's a lot of sort of Vaughan Williams, um, quite playful up tempo music. When what's actually happening in the film is quite sinister and threatening. When the shark starts to chase them, there are sections, Quint's maxing out the diesel engine or whatever, and the score will kind of go do 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 do. It's a bit like I don't know, The Great Escape or something, and it's quite light. Um, and actually, the action is not light at that point. Essentially, these guys are under threat of horrible death. So there are just a few moments where, if I was nitpicking, I would say, and I guess it's the director ultimately that's done that rather than the composer, because I know they work very much together, but maybe I'm wrong actually. Maybe Williams was pitching that was the correct mood for the music at that point. But there are just a few too many moments like that towards the end of the film, I think, where the score for me is inappropriately light and upbeat, when in fact the scenario that the characters are going through is pretty sinister and quite scary and hopeless. Don't know. Have I gone off the deep end?
No, no, not at all. I actually noticed the same thing on this viewing, particularly that the score of this film is so famous in its intensity because of this sort of bowed, this high, the cello, the famous cello theme in the
Sure.
film, that it's surprising to watch it in full again and notice, as you say, how much of it has this Vaughan Williams, like there's some blaring trumpet, sort of
Yeah.
quite, it's quite very lighthearted. I think that I take your point about we talk about this variance in tone and this calibration of tone. Yes, I think that, like you're saying, it is ultimately the director, and that this is maybe something that is to be taken issue with Spielberg. Like his inclination to lighten it does often sort of maybe hurt the material artistically. Like it detracts from the intensity, but it may be the thing that ultimately makes it more audience reaching, which is not to say commercial. It's just to say the way that Spielberg would go famously is that he wanted to revive a very like an old Hollywood notion of how to make films. I guess this is why he was going to do Lucky Lady. But it's like with Raiders of the Lost Ark and those kinds of things. It's yeah, it's like an old 1940s style genre thing for the family. And here, the score sometimes reaches into like Errol Flynn
Yes.
swashbuckling film
That's it.
territory.
Those are the words that I couldn't quite find earlier. Swashbuckling. Exactly
Mm.
that. Errol Flynn. It's like it's a Robin Hood movie sometimes in the score towards the end. But Robin Hood movies, nobody really gets, in the Errol Flynn films, nobody gets hurt, do they? Nobody gets bitten in half. Uh, when music like that is part of the film score, you know that no one is going to get seriously hurt. That's the problem I have with it. That music says, all will be well. We are in the presence of one or more heroes here. All will be well. And that's completely the wrong message to send at that point, because it's very, very much not all will be well. And so there's a bit of a slippage, really. There's a bit of a mismatch between, that in terms of tone. Yeah, I think the score just lets the film down a little bit in places there, but who am I? Who am I to say?
I
It's a
mean,
great score for the vast
it,
vast majority of the running time.
there's an interesting thing to be teased out there, which is like, as you said, but like what endings were characteristic of the time. I think the ending is uncharacteristic of the time. I think that we famously in the 70s, even the
Yeah,
big commercial films, the endings could often be quite flat and bleak, and there was a certain degree to which audiences were, in some sense, attracted to fill the hard stories. And there is a kind of, like I was to say about uh, this film takes place in a quite what is supposed to be a sort of toughened world of men. They kind of it almost has two endings, which is there's like the 70s ending, which is the kind of almost Hemingway staccato dialogue between Hooper and Brody, where he just says, he comes up and he says, Quint, and Brody says, no. And that's it, you know.
Yeah.
And that's kind of your 70s ending. And then the sort of the inclination is to make it, you know, to have a joke at the end. Oh, I never really liked the water. Oh, I can't imagine
Yes.
why. You know, it's
Yeah.
almost like there's almost the sitcom things
Yes.
we play after
Yes.
that. But there's, you know, did you compare it to other films? You know, compare it to Night Moves, Gene Hackman Night Moves, which also ends. It's which is maybe a little bit more obscure now, but it's a film from the same year, like a detective film, and that which also ends with a man alone on a boat in the middle of the sea, but does not end with the same tone as this film. There's probably a reason why this film was your summer phenomenon in 1975 and that film wasn't. And it's because what we're watching here, what we're seeing here is, again, this is maybe an intentional pun, but a sea change in terms of audience desire as to how they wanted to land. Spielberg puts you on the thrill ride, gives you all these scares, but at the very end, he says, we all had fun, didn't we? You can go home and, you know, relax,
Exactly.
go into the car park, relax, you know.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. Listen, I think I need to move us on. Yeah. We
Yeah.
need to move uh, and move on and ask the question: Jaws, is it a classic?
I would say, for me, unequivocally, yes. Um, Despite what we've said about some of the problems we might have had with this film, I think this is a film, this may be the film that probably most perfectly achieves the thing that it sets out to do. In terms of a Spielbergian mode, something that has spectacle, but also intimacy and texture and richness and you know, real technical achievement and everything. This might be maybe the best thing that he made. And if we can say that there was effects on subsequent cinema that were maybe detrimental, this blockbuster cinema, this film for me exists in a sweet spot of gritty verisimilitude, human level drama, and technical spectacle. Um, this, as I say, it achieves a certain perfection in terms of what it's trying to achieve, and I think it still works incredibly well for a film that's over 50 years. I watched it yesterday evening. I was gripped from that opening scene onwards. I was gripped. There's no way of not watching the rest of the film once you watch the opening scene. For me, yes, classic, unequivocal.
Okay, nicely said. I agree. It's a classic, and I think it falls into, as you alluded to right at the top end of this conversation, it falls into that group of films which are so classic that you know you could they might as well change the name to classic. It is a classic film. I think it's a classic piece of cinema. The reason, which speaks for itself, and you've captured all that very nicely. I'd also say it's a classic story. It's a classic narrative arc, classic journey. This is the kind of hero journey, which is common in all human storytelling. You know, this is Beowulf. Um, you know, Grendel appears and causes havoc, and Grendel must be dispatched, and you know, Grendel's mother must be dispatched, and the hero has to be sent out on a journey. The hero eventually dies. You know, arguably, the three guys at the end of the film have been that could be one character. It would be an absurd film if it was, but other films have done that. You know, three that could be one person with those three different kind of attributes or attitudes or whatever. They've nicely split a conflicted, complex, multi-level hero into three different people there. But essentially, this is a hero's journey. You know, the kind of the invader, the intruder appears in the domestic scene. causes havoc and needs to be dispatched. And the people that do the dispatching, or the people that do the dispatching, have got a lot to learn. They've got trials and tribulations. They're going to find out about themselves. They're going to be exposed as having weaknesses. They're going to look as if they're almost going to fail. And ultimately, they do. One or more of them actually does prevail. And with a sense that we might just now all be able to live happily ever after at the end of it. So yeah, I mean, it's a classic-y classic. It's got the classicness of classic-y classicness about at the highest possible level that you could have. It's just it's a great piece of cinema, but it's a great story as well. And I actually think the what's wonderful about the story, I think that without lapsing into kind of cod sort of Jungian analysis, there's something quite sort of atavistic, quite primeval about the extent to which a story of this kind, where a threat is thwarted, a threat from outside is thwarted by marshalling our resources. There's something that's incredibly primitive about the appeal of that, which is quite separate, but obviously related to the mere fact of it having been placed inside a fantastically well-made film as well. So there's so many things going on here. Jaws, undoubtedly a classic. Brilliant. I think we're done. Okay, thank you very much for watching and listening. Please do like and subscribe, and let us know in the comments if you have any views about anything that you've seen or heard us say here, and also if there are any other films that you'd like us to discuss. In the meantime, take care, and we hope to see you again.